Is Tamara here?
I really hope the noises that my neighbor is making is gonna be okay for this video. Hi everyone, welcome back to another video here on the channel Royal Horror. I really hope you're well. I really hope that you're very excited because this week is all about The Strangers. It's all about them. We have a new film coming up after like 6 years, so what a better time to be a horror fan and Strangers fan. So that's why I got inspired to make this video, because to celebrate the new film coming up. So in case you didn't know, The Strangers from 2008 is one of my favorite horror films of all time. It's one of my comfort ones. I do believe it's one of the greatest horror films ever. So, and the sequel, I'm actually not mad about it. I actually enjoy that film. I love rewatching it. I think it's such a fun watch. So in today's video, I want to talk about them. I want to compare them. I want to give fun facts about each film. We're gonna go through like the deep dive into these two films. If you are a fan of these two films, and if you want to know more about them, sit back, relax, grab a snack, grab a drink, and enjoy this deep dive of the Strangers films. So to kick off chapter 1, talking about The Strangers from 2008, let's first talk about what was behind cameras, who was the director, how did he come up with this idea, is this film truly inspired by true events, and the phenomenon that this film became. Oh, and by the way, my resources for this deep dive are based on the behind the scenes from the Blu-rays and DVDs, and this booklet that I found in the Blu-ray special edition, talking about all of the info that you need to know about The Strangers. Now, The Strangers from 2008 was directed and written by someone called Brian Bernito. Now, this director was born in Texas, and just as many directors out there, he also went to film school and all of that. But something that I found very fascinating about this director is that he is very introvert, and you can tell by the way he does the interviews and all of that, which not shame of that, because I also behave like him, and because he has commented that he always found himself pushing his boundaries in film school, in the film industry, because he never expected to become such an extrovert person against his will, if that makes sense. So, and it's the same with me, because of film school and because of the films that I've shot, I'm always pushing my boundaries to go out there, to talk to people, to communicate and all of that, which is crucial in this industry. Now, before we start talking about something that I found fascinating about this film, and it's the fact that he went through hell to make this film happen, let's first talk about how did he got inspired to create The Strangers from 2008. Now, as you might have expected, he's also a huge horror fan. He's a huge horror nerd. The first horror film that he watched at the cinemas was Halloween from 1978, for a 20th anniversary in the 90s, something like that. And also he watched all of the Scream films as they were coming out at the cinemas. So because of that, as you might have expected, he got hella inspired to create The Strangers thanks to Halloween and Scream. Mostly because he realized that those two films, they were so impactful, and they didn't involve CGI or green screens. It was mostly all practical, and he wanted something like that for The Strangers. He didn't want anything that required SVX effects, because he wanted to make something as low budget as possible with everything practical, which obviously that makes a lot of sense because this is a home invasion, it's a slasher, so the more realistic it looks, the more impactful it can be. Because during film school, he was someone that loved writing dramas and horrors, but mostly drama because of his film essays and all of that. he always mentioned that he wanted to create as his first featurette something that I was involved in a lot of drama and a lot of horror, because he always had believed that those two subgenres in film are the ones that really know how to work with each other to impact the audience, because of the feelings that the audience might feel, the characters the audience might feel connected because of the drama that is on the film, but also because of the horrifying aspects and scenes that are happening on the film. And I think he accomplished that pretty perfectly in The Strangers, because I think the combination between horror and drama in that film are immaculate. Now, why do I say that this director is really inspiring? And the main reason is because he went through hell to make this film happen. Like, you have no idea, and I can just only imagine his frustration when all of this stuff was happening to him, because it was always him by himself. He wrote this film by himself, he did the short list by himself, and like I said before, he pushed himself to go out there and ask for a producer, for an editor, for a cinematographer, and all of that, because he just knew he couldn't do it all by himself. Now, as you might know, in the film industry, when you want to make a featurette, there is a lot of steps going on before that happens. So obviously, after he finished the script, he contacted his agent and they sent it to the most popular production company for horror on that time, called Vertigo. And as you might know, Vertigo is a production company that is in charge of and that has released films such as It, Barbarian, Don't Worry Darling, Doctor Sleep, His House, Blair Witch Project, Copwed, Quarantine, The Roommate, The Uninvited, Buckhead, and the list goes on and on and on. So he had he went truly to the maximum level for his first featurette. Like, the Vertigo producers, while they were reading this script, they felt safe and they knew that this film was gonna make numbers and all of that, so they believed in him overall. However, and this is on you, Vertigo producers, because you just don't do this. After hiring Brian, after having his script, after making him sign the contract that he was gonna be the director, the writer, whatever, of his own film, he literally got fired from The Strangers production. And on top of that, because he was working overall in the same building, the production company overall, unfortunately he could hear so many people talking about The Strangers, so many positive stuff about it, and I'm not sure if that's allowed to do, to talk about a film inside like the production company, but it might happen. So he could hear so much stuff about his own film while being fired. So imagine how angry he was, how frustrated he was. However, I have to admire him, because he always said on so many interviews, he said, if being fired means that my film gets to be produced and made in one of the biggest companies out there and get released in theaters and all of that, then I'm okay with being fired, if that means I will see my film in the big screen. However, when life wants to help you out, trust me, it will, because like on a random day he receives a call from an agent, and the agent says, look, Vertigo, they want to have you, they want to hire you back, because they just don't know how to direct this film, because obviously The Strangers is such a simplistic storyline script, but it's very complicated to make it effective, because I think the simpler it is, the more complicated it can be when it comes to production. Now, back at the beginning of this video, when I asked, is this film truly inspired by like real events? And the answer is no, it's not really based on that. But what I'm gonna say is that this film, what they wanted to do is they wanted to communicate the amount of crimes, home invasion crimes, that were happening in the United States on that era. So this film overall is not that the Strangers happened literally, but a lot of stuff that were similar was happening all around the country. So basically the director wanted to have this film as a message of what was happening in his country. Now, which brings me to the point, and one of the most interesting aspects that I found from this book, and is that the writers from this book, they mention so much the 9/11 catastrophe. So they compare it, because they always, like, they wrote it on the book, and they say that America, like United States, was always defined as the richest, the most safest country in the whole world until that catastrophe happened, because that catastrophe obviously shocked the entire world. Oh, I'm not gonna go there obviously because that's not part of this video, but basically they just wanted to, like, the director mentions that catastrophe because like everyone got scared, everyone's lives changed within seconds, like without expecting it. And they compare that so much to the horror genre, how in horror films your life, like your emotions, your fears, they get touched, your triggers, without you expecting them within seconds because of the characters, because of the jump scares, the villains, the storyline overall. And they compare it to films such as Quarantine, Wreck, and Cloverfield. And they compare those three films with the metaphor of the lack of hope. Cloverfield was, at the beginning, was a normal event. I think everyone was celebrating New Year's Eve. So everyone was happy, and out of nowhere, something happened like that. I think it's an alien invasion. I haven't seen the film in a while. So the lack of hope again, because you don't know what to do in the situation, you don't know what to run, you don't know what to do, and all of that. So you just don't have hope for your life. That's why the director Brian wanted to make The Strangers, because he wanted to make something very realistic and something that will make the audience feel that the characters don't have any hope of surviving, and obviously so the audience will feel portrayed in the characters and see, will I survive if this happens? Personally, if The Strangers happens to me, I think I wouldn't survive, because what could possibly you do in that situation when you have three like psychopaths in your house? So I think that's why The Strangers was very effective, and I think that's why his vision was really well portrayed in the film. This brings me to the point of, at the beginning of the film in The Strangers, you might notice that that's very similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre introduction, where you got the title cards and a narrator going through what's on the text. Now, the director obviously mentions that this is hella inspired by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because as we know, that film is not that it's truly based on real events, but in that time, the 74s, there were like a big massacre happened somewhere, I don't remember. So that's why that film gets inspired heavily. The same with The Strangers, and that's why in the beginning of The Strangers, you can hear the narrator going through how in the last couple of years, America has been experiencing so many crimes and all of that, and the film you're about to see is about these two characters that are going through that. Again, to portray how many crimes were happening all at once in the country. Now, the director had so many discussions with the Vertigo producers. Like, that guy, bless him, he went through so much because he really wanted to reveal the faces of the strangers. He really wanted to make sure the audience saw that it was real people, normal people, like common people. But obviously the Vertigo producers didn't allow him to do this because they said if we don't show the faces, that might allow us to make this film a whole franchise. Little did they know what was gonna happen almost 20 years after. So that's the main reason why, and that's why they came across to a same conclusion, and that's why in the first film you barely see their faces, but you still can tell they're like normal humans. Something that I found fascinating is that the horror icon Stephen King dedicated 2 articles over his website to The Strangers because Stephen King absolutely loves The Strangers. Now, when it comes to casting, it was mostly thanks to Vertigo. Brian was not really in charge of casting that much. However, he always said that he wanted an actress that hadn't done horror at all. He wanted to have a first-time actress in the genre, and that's why Liv Taylor got casted. This is something that I found very fascinating, and it's that the actress, she read the script throughout an entire flight from Japan to United States, and she fell in love. She loved the script. She said, I want to make this, I want to be this character, I know I can do it. This film looks terrifying, it looks very psychological. So as soon as she landed in the United States, she called her agent and she was like, please let me be this film, please let me be this character, please don't tell me that somebody else got casted. And thankfully nobody had. So that's why the role went directly to her. And I'm so glad her and Brian got a beautiful communication, because Brian always admired how, the fact that she was never in a horror film before, how much her screams were impacting him behind cameras. And he always said that her screams reminded him so much of Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. now, just before we close chapter 1, I just want to say that the director, he has commented that the most challenging scene that he has ever done in his career, even until now, is the stabbing scene, the last scene, because he felt that he was literally recording a murder because of the makeup, the screams from both of the actors, and because of how raw and how bizarre, how disturbing that scene feels. Welcome to the chapter 2 of this deep dive to talk about The Strangers 2 Prey at Night, released in 2018. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that this film was written all the way back in 2009. This film got announced in 2008 by Brian because he already had written the script directly after the original film. He knew that he wanted to make a sequel because obviously, like I said before, he got inspired by the first Halloween and he saw how well the sequel of the Halloween it was. So he knew he wanted to bring the Strangers family once again to do something different directly after the original of the first film. However, Vertigo, they didn't let him do this because they believed that they had to wait a few years so the Strangers could have like some air, so the audience could like be talking about the Strangers non-stop before a sequel will be announced, although Brian already had the script ready to go into production. And the actress that played the main protagonist in the first Strangers, she got called to be the director of this sequel because obviously Brian and her, they worked so well. However, she declined that offer because she always said that her career is acting and not really directing, and she always mentioned that if she will direct a Strangers film, it will be next to Brian, the original writer from the original film. Otherwise, she just wouldn't do it. However, she also said that she would love to be back in another Strangers film with the same character. And at first, she was gonna be the opening kill of Prey at Night, but obviously they removed that. But finally, back in 2016, this film went directly into production and all of that, like 2015, 2016, and it was directed by someone called Johannes Roberts, and you might know him because he has directed films such as the Resident Evil, the latest film, both of the 47 meters down, one clip from VHS 99, so on and so on. However, this is like his first slasher and his first home invasion, and he has mentioned that he doesn't really want to do another slasher or another home invasion. Like, at least he gave us this film because I really like this film. Like, I think this film is underrated, but that's a talk for another topic. So at least we got that. And you might be asking why Ryan was not involved in the making of this film, because obviously he's the writer and all of that. But it's because he was really busy making a film called The Dark and the Wicked, which that film also had a lot of like nightmares, and that film was really hard to make. But obviously it's not part of this video, but he was really busy trying to make that film happen, and that's why he could not be in charge of The Strangers 2. Now, welcome to chapter 3, where I'm gonna be comparing both of these films when it comes to the storyline, the characters, the editing, and all of that, and also how the audience reacted over Letterboxd, IMDb, and all that jazz. Now, the first Strangers had a budget of just $9 million and worldwide managed to accomplish around $83 million, and that's a huge difference, and I'm so happy this happened to them, because imagine having that low budget film making it into that huge amount of money. And when it comes to the audience reactions, The Strangers stands on a 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb and on a 3.0 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Now that just makes me think that this movie is not really that loved by the horror community or by like the audiences in general, because I think 6.1 and 3 is very low for the film that it is and for the impact that it had back in the day, and even right now, because for me, again, it's one of the most realistic films, one of the most terrifying, one of the most effective. Like, I always think about positive stuff, and as you saw, I gave this film 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. So it really shocks me how low the ratings are for this film. The sequel is even worse, because the sequel stands on a 5.2 out of 10 on IMDb and on a 2.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Now this makes a slightly more sense to me, because nobody was really happy that this film got announced, because it was like an unnecessary sequel, And I disagree. I think The Strangers Pray at Night is a fun watch. I think it's also very different to the original, and obviously we're gonna compare them. I do think it's not a bad sequel at all. I think it deserves more. I think it serves to the slasher fans. It serves more as a slasher, typical slasher horror film compared to the original, because the original is not really a slasher. So, like, why not? Both films offer something different. So again, it really shocks me because that film is not that bad, and I think it deserves more than a 5 and than a 2.7. Come on. Now, The First Stranger got so many nominations all around the world in different film festivals. Nominations including Best Screenplay, Best Horror, Best Poster, Best Actor, Actress, Best Score, Best Sound Editing, and all of that. But The Strangers only managed to win just one award, and it was for the Best Actress in a Horror Film in 2008. So obviously Liv Taylor, she won that award. And The Strangers 2 had a budget of just $5 million, and worldwide it managed to accomplish $32 million. Still, it's a huge difference, so I'm glad that they didn't go bankrupt with that film. Now I'm so excited to start comparing these films, and the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna compare both characters. So in the first film we got just a couple, and one of the main things that I love about it is that how dysfunctional this couple is, how realistic it is. I love the fact that the couple, they used to be so happy. They used to like in the flashbacks in the film, they used to be the perfect couple you could meet. And when the film happens and when the events are happening, we get to discover they had a huge discussion because obviously she didn't say yes to his proposal. So that was really realistic, and also the fact that all of these events are happening to them while going through that, also that fight in the relationship. It makes you think, what's gonna happen? Is he gonna save her? Is she gonna save him? And is he part of this and all of that? So it gives you that human touch, because we're following a couple that you might feel identified with. And also, one of the things that I love the most is that even though they're going through a fight and all of that, they still care for each other. And at the end, that scene where they say I love you while being stabbed, that gets on my skin, because that's just so sad, and it's also very scary. Now, comparing it to the characters from the sequel, obviously they are completely different characters because we're following a family instead. But one thing that I also like about the sequel is, again, how dysfunctional and how realistic the family is. So we have the typical family, mom, dad, son, daughter, but what's different is that we have a rebel teenage, and we also have the boy that he doesn't really listen to his parents and all of that. So we have a family that's going through so much because we have these two parents and they just don't know how to behave with their children. We have the teenager, and with that teenager, the way she is portrayed, it's very realistic, because we all have been through that phase that we don't want to listen to our parents, that we don't like them, that we wish them the worst. So this movie really portrays that in a good way. And one thing that I really admire about it is that when all of this stuff starts to happen in The Strangers 2, you really feel how affected this teenager, both the boy and the girl, how affected they are with what's happening. I think one of the most crucial scenes in the film is when the mom and the daughter, they're being stalked, and they're being harassed, or they're being chased by one of the Strangers members. And that whole interaction between the mom and the daughter, it was really impactful, and it always makes me tear. That scene is very sad because the daughter literally sees how her mom is being killed, and a few scenes later she has this breakdown with her brother, where she's I didn't treat my mom the way that I should have, and now she's dead. So she starts to regret so much, and I think that was such a humanistic touch to that part of the film. Now, talking about characters, let's talk about the icons, the Strangers family, because I think they are underrated horror villains. And yes, I said it. And the Strangers, in case you didn't know, the actors and actresses that portray them in the first film are different to the others from the second film. So pros for the filmmakers, because I literally believed it was the same people, but they aren't. Now, one thing that I want to say is that I think the best strangers is the doll face, the girl with the blonde hair, because it's the most savage. She is the one that knocks the door and says the line, "Is Tamara home?" So for me, she's my favorite stranger, but I think each of the members, they offer something different. Now, in the first film, I think the Stranger's family, they are scarier. I think they are very, I don't want to say disturbing, but like they feel like real, like the real villains that might happen to you any time of the day at your own house. They are clever, like they know how to treat their victims. They know how to scare their victims. They know how to go into their mind because of the knocks, because when they are inside the house. So they have more of an impact on the audience because you don't see them that much. So you don't know where they are, when are they coming. They don't really interact too much with the characters until like the end of the film. And I think that was really effective because the less we knew, the less we saw them, the more impactful it was, at least for me. Now, comparing it to the sequel, I think the Stranger's family in the sequel are not as impactful as they were in the first film. And the main thing is because we see them too much. Like we see them like a lot of times. We see like doll face. We see her so much. We see her face like on the shadows. We can see her face, and I'm not a fan of that. Also, we barely see Pinup Girl like the other stranger in the sequel. She's just in the film for like what, 40 seconds, and I think she deserves more because in the first film she was more active. And also Buckhead Man, I think he's better in the sequel because he's more of an slasher icon. He reminded me so much of Michael Myers and Leatherface because of the way he was moving with the hashed and all of that. Now the storylines are obviously quite similar. We got a home invasion and all of that. So what I'm gonna say is that I love the use of location in both films. In the first film, something that I admired so much is that the house that we see in the film is not an actual house. It was actually built from zero for the sake of the film, because obviously it was a lot of work to be in an actual house with all of the equipment, the camera, the lightings, all of that. So they had to build the house from zero. So props for the filmmakers because that must have not been easy to do. So I love the use of location in the first film because each corner in the house feels like a threat, because you feel like the strangers and in each corner, especially because of the famous and like one of the most terrifying shots that we know is when the character is going through the kitchen and we see the stranger all the time in her bag. I think the use of location in that shot was amazing because even though it feels warm, it feels wholesome because she is in the living room by herself, so she should feel safe, but obviously she's not. Obviously the communication between the shadows and the character, fantastic stuff. In the sequel, I absolutely love the use of location in that film because they know how to work with the trailers and also with the forest, with the cars, all of that. Like we have three main locations and they are used so perfectly. There is a lot of homage to John Carpenter's Christine, The Fog, Halloween. Like The Strangers 2, I think is such a love letter to slasher fans. And obviously one of the most iconic scenes in The Strangers, Pray at Night, is the pool scene. I think the use of location there was fantastic. Like they really knew how to work with a swimming pool, and that's something that you don't really see that much in horror. Actually, we go to the sound design of the films. We can start talking about them. The sound design in the pool scene was so good. It was so perfect because of the way you could hear the noises from inside the pool, from outside the pool. I think the editing there was fantastic. Now also, I have to say that in the first film, I really like how we don't really have that many kills because it's more of a home invasion psychological kind of film. But I do have to say, like the two kills, like the blood that we have in the film was really effective, especially because like the best friend of the main guy, the way he looked while he was on the floor after being shot and all of that was super realistic. And also we go back to the stabbing. I think that was incredible, the way it sounded, the way it looked, especially when our main protagonist is like crawling on the floor. Like her dress, her makeup, so gorgeous and so realistic, like absolutely phenomenal. And in the second film, again, the gore was so good, especially with the two, the uncle and the aunt. The way they were in bed with that practical effects, that blood, incredible. I also loved the way, like, the continuity with the blood on the characters' faces. And also one of my favorite scenes is when the Baghead, he's like burned in fire, and you could see his makeup with his Baghead and his face with the burned. I think the makeup there looked so good. And also the score and the soundtrack from both films was really good. I think like the songs are so iconic, they're so memorable, you can sing along while the strangers are murdering. So that was a fun touch. Now we have come to the conclusion of this video. I could talk about these films the entire day because I just love them. I adore them like so much. But let me know how do you feel about the Strangers films? How do you feel about the new one coming up this week? How do you feel about the new trilogy overall? I would love to read your thoughts on them so we can interact and like discuss about the Strangers films. Always be safe out there. I hope you have a nice end of the week. We will talk soon. Bye bye.